Well, hello, greetings, everyone. Happy Sunday. Happy Sunday. We hope, as always, that you are finding ways to preserve your mental, physical, and spiritual strength through these trying times. And we welcome you here today. This program is sponsored by the All African People's Revolutionary Party. And we will get started in just a moment. Just a couple of housekeeping items. Number one, I have two housemates. They are two parakeets and they are very loud. Whenever I'm loud, they're loud. So you will hear them in the background. I apologize for that, but they have strong political views on everything. So whenever I start engaging, they start engaging. So just understand that they are wanting you to understand their perspective in this world, which they have a right to have. And the other thing is that everybody will stay on mute. Unfortunately, we live in a backward society where instead of people being able to figure out ways to confront ideas they don't agree with on an ideological level, people instead resort to sabotage to prevent you from articulating your ideas. So everyone will be on mute, but we do encourage you to enter any questions, comments you have if you're on Zoom in the chat, and if you're on Facebook, we're doing our absolute best to monitor that so that we can interact with you throughout this hour. And so with that, we will start, as we always do, by acknowledging the indigenous people of the Western Hemisphere. Every step we take in this hemisphere is treading in the blood of their suffering. And so we should always acknowledge that. We should not be going to protest chanting whose streets are streets, because these are not your streets. These are the streets. These are the avenues. These are the highways, the mountains, the rivers, the lakes, the oceans, the beaches of the indigenous people of the Western Hemisphere. Everybody else is just here either because you're African and your ancestors were kidnapped and brought here against their will, or you're the descendants of settlers who came here and participated in the theft of the land from the indigenous people. So there's no your streets here. This isn't your streets. And our work is about supporting the indigenous people in getting their land back. That's what they want and need. They don't need people to buy moccasins at the side of the road. They need their land back. So we always acknowledge them. And of course, we acknowledge our African ancestors who have struggled for thousands of years, most recently the last 500 plus years, against the process of kidnapping us and dispersing us all over the world while taking overt control of the African continent's human and material resources. So this is the reason why Africa's the richest continent on earth today, but African people everywhere on earth are the poorest people today. So we always acknowledge our ancestors who fought and continue to give us the legacy of fighting and resisting and moving forward. So we thank them, we honor them with everything we try to do and all the work that we do. And we honor all peace and justice loving people. So with that, we'll go ahead and get started. We always start with just a brief introduction. And my name is Ajamu Umi, longtime organizer for the All African People's Revolutionary Party. I've done work for the party in Europe, in the US, Canada, and of course, and the Caribbean, and of course, all throughout the African continent. And next, we have my amazing, outstanding, wonderful daughter, Shakura Umi as well. And Shakura grew up in the All African People's Revolutionary Party's Young Pioneer Institute program. And now she is a student candidate for her doctorate in Memphis, Tennessee, and she's working on a doctorate in communication public health. She has a vast array of activist activities that she engages in there in Tennessee around primarily African women's health issues. And I've had the honor of helping and participating in some of the work that she's engaged in. So could not be prouder of her. And also, I just want to give a shout out to not just Shakura and I, but any parent children who are working together to contribute towards justice, because oftentimes people my age, like, they can't even have conversations with their children. And so I'm extremely proud of the fact that my only child and I do work like this together. We talk every day, and I've not been a perfect parent. There's no such thing, but I've really tried my best to instill values and principles of justice in her life. And the work that she does illustrates that her mom and I were successful in doing that, even though we have been divorced 26 years, which speaks to our humanist principles as well. So I just want to honor Shakura a little more and honor the fact that, you know, here we are doing this work. You know, a lot of people, they want to see African fathers and daughters just dancing together and singing together. And we can certainly do that. We're very qualified to do those things together. And we have done those things together. She and I are a mean karaoke team. But more important than that, we're together to talk about and organize around justice, not only for African people, but all of humanity. So I'm thankful for her. And then getting back to the APRP quickly, our objective is Pan-Africanism, which we define as one unified socialist Africa. We believe, as Kwame Nkrumah said, that until Africa is free, no African anywhere on earth will be free. And so we see Pan-Africanism as the sole objective of African revolutionaries all over the planet. So that's our work. And the book at the top there, the Handbook of Revolutionary Warfare by Kwame Nkrumah, is the basic manual we use as our strategy to achieve Pan-Africanism. And you see all the organization logos there are a part of the work we do. We have sister relationships with them, and we're all building together. So when people ask, well, how many people are involved in your work? Hundreds of thousands of people are involved in the direct work we are engaged in, building one unified socialist Africa and growing more and more every day. And then also along with that, you know, we recognize we don't struggle in a vacuum. So not only do we have chapters worldwide all throughout Africa and the Western Hemisphere and Europe, but we have strong relationships with other liberation movements. The Filipino National Liberation Movement, they just contacted us to, they want to even intensify our relationships. Obviously, the movements of the indigenous people of the Western Hemisphere, the Irish Republican Socialist Movement, we maintain strong contact and relationships with, and of course the Palestinian National Liberation Movement, because all of those movements are fighting for the same things that we are: an end to settler colonialism, an end to political and economic colonialism and neo-colonialism, the eradication of capitalism, and the creation of socialist states. So one unified socialist Africa, that's our objective, and we're sticking to it. And now, at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Shakura to start in our very important discussion today about white accomplices, truths, and myths.
Okay, thank you so much, Daddy. The pleasure is all mine, and I wouldn't be the person I am without the AAPRP's mission and value. I wouldn't change anything about who I am, because everything that I do is related not just to this presentation today, but to the past presentations that you've given and just my whole life and the foundation. So what you said is beautiful, but the feeling is mutual, and we all have work to do, no matter how we define that work being. So I'm humbled and grateful to be a part of that. So without further ado, we'll jump into the slides. So I want to make sure that we understand that all people have the right to determine their own destiny, and no true accomplice or partner in combating oppression would ever seek to define the struggle of people they are supposedly supporting, okay? In the example of a portion of the South being provided to Africans to separate, so I know that ideology is familiar to many of you in terms of us separating as Africans from Europeans, but the proposal is often miscredited to the Honorable Elijah Muhammad and the Nation of Islam, when actually it was proposed by the bookshelves of the Soviet Union when they introduced the concept to the Communist Party USA to promote among African masses in the US and to try to drive people away from Marcus Garvey's ideology and his Pan-African message. So their point in doing that with the Black Belt strategy wasn't to concretely help the African masses, but to manipulate us from African leadership. So it was a distraction, in other words, and organizational models based on principles of African self-determination. These are similar examples related to Azania, which also known as South Africa, anti-apartheid struggle, and other struggles. Probably the best example today is the extent to which you can easily find Europeans attempting to greatly influence the direction of the struggle of the indigenous peoples of the Western Hemisphere. I want you to notice how you never hear these so-called accomplices push for the land to be returned to the indigenous people. That solution never comes up in these conversations. This isn't even being an accomplice. This is actually just being manipulative in order to attempt to center the European ideals, which ultimately just increases the control for the Europeans to have their movements and control over them to have over oppressed people and colonized people. Next slide, please. So we, as the AAPRP, would argue that the basis of the problem with white accomplices has been white supremacy. These people believe naively that they are beyond being impacted by white supremacy when they are the primary example of how white supremacy operates. By white supremacy, we mean the system that was created to justify the colonization and exploitation of African natural resources. The kidnapping and subjugation of Africans into slavery is one example. The theft of and systemic murder of indigenous peoples of the Western Hemisphere, number two. The justification of the Korean and Vietnamese wars and the continued demonization of China, three. White supremacy was designed to condition us to believe colonized people need Europeans to exist on a civilized level, and even so-called accomplices are not immune to this conditioning. The proof of this is born out of how most of these so-called white accomplices can typically tell you little to nothing about African liberation struggles, movements, leaders, etc. White left socialist organizations impose white ideologies onto African struggles. White anarchists consistently demonstrate no respect for African leadership of demonstrations. All of these are concrete examples of how the so-called accomplices usually end up creating more traumatic work for colonized people in our movements because we are forced to spend so much energy addressing and correcting white involvement and influences. We can see how this would also be a distraction to keeping our eyes on what the main objective is for what we're trying to do when we come together in these organized institutions of organized groups of people. Probably the largest and most adverse impact is when whites posing as friends to Africans' advancement adopt positions that consistently coup our movements. Whites in Zimbabwe and Azania claim to be for justice, being against land reclamation because it centers Africans, not them. Whites in the Western Hemisphere diverting discussion about indigenous land rights because it doesn't center them. Whites claiming to be against white supremacy while also supporting the existence of the Zionist state of Israel and dominating the Palestinian people's right to their own land. Even on an individual level, whites refusing to listen to African analysis of our conditions if our analysis doesn't center their existence. These are all examples of unhealthy participation of Europeans in our spaces. The old saying in this instance is so true. The road to hell is paved with good intentions. I remember my dad and I had come back from visiting Alcatraz because they have an event every year on Thanksgiving where members of the American Indian movement get together and they have a sunrise ceremony where we pay homage to the ancestors and just give thanks for understanding that this is the indigenous people's lands and trying to pay them the respect that they deserve while still honoring Mother Earth and everything else that comes from that. So instead of being around family and eating food and killing animals, we spend that time early in the morning with our brothers and sisters, telling them thank you for giving us such a rich gift, even though it was taken for them by force. And I remember after we went to the sunrise event, there was a protest it was in the Bay Area, of course. And so there was a protest at the Fruitville Station BART stop in, I think it was Richmond, where Oscar Grant was murdered, shot and murdered by a BART policeman. And so we went to the protest to pay homage and to acknowledge Oscar and his family and his child and his partner and all these things. And I remember being there and just being in that space as an African person. And I remember Europeans coming, not because they wanted to intrude, or maybe even not because they wanted to center themselves, but they still didn't understand how their white supremacy was getting in the way of us truly treating that as a monument for Oscar and his bravery that night. And so repeatedly, I want you to picture Africans standing in a circle and saying our African chants. There was song, there was movement, we had drums, people were wearing white to show unity. It was a beautiful thing, and we were trying to just pay homage to his family. And repeatedly, we had to repeat on the bullhorn, Europeans, please step back. You don't need to enter this circle. This is our space, and we're just trying to protect our space. We appreciate you being here. We thank you for trying to be on our side as we fight and talk about why this should not have happened in the first place. But this is a sacred space, and you do not have permission to be here. And I don't think they had ever heard that before. And so I think for any Europeans who are listening to this presentation today, I would just challenge you as a European person who has power, even if you are a cis-identifying woman who is European, you still have more power than I do, even though we're both women. So I would just challenge you, whether you're a man, woman, cis, trans, however you identify, if you are European descent, I would challenge you just to think about why you think it is uncomfortable for Europeans to think about not being centered. And if you can really answer that question, then I think we can start to get to the basis of how Europeans are always reaching out to me, asking me, what do I think they can be doing at this time? I think it starts, my dad and I have had this conversation, with organizing those who look like you, because I don't have space or permission to go into a European space and to organize them. And I have my plate full with what I'm trying to do with my own people. So I think that would be the first step. And really the challenge is not, can you as a European person understand why you're not comfortable centering yourself or why you're not comfortable with other people centering you, but how can you get your own people to understand that they do not need to be centered all the time? That's going to be the real challenge. And so that's where the organization comes in, that's where the support comes in, and that's where this open dialogue comes in. So I thank you so much for your time and attention, and I will turn it back over to my dad.
Thank you, very well said. And so now, since Shakur's, I think, done an outstanding job giving a framework for what does not look like healthy, accomplished work, we want to give some examples, some individual examples of people who we believe have absolutely exemplified what a quality European accomplice looks like. So the first person we'll talk about is Haiti Tamara Bunk. Haiti Tamara Bunk was a woman from East Germany. In the 1960s, she was a Spanish interpreter. And after the Cuban Revolution, she moved to Cuba to work for the East German embassy as an interpreter from Spanish to German. And during that time, she met some of the, obviously the leadership of the Cuban Revolution, Ernesto Che Guevara included. And when Ernesto Che Guevara came back from the Congo, fighting in the Congo in 1964, of course, he established the ill-fated mission that cost him his life in Bolivia. And Haiti Tamara Bunk volunteered to participate in that effort that was designed to liberate the poor, suffering peasantry in Bolivia. And this East German white woman took on the role of becoming a high society socialite in La Paz, Bolivia, so that she could gain information that would help Che and the guerrilla forces who were out in the rural areas. And unfortunately, her cover was blown and she was forced to flee her post, and she ended up out in the rural area with the guerrillas and was set up by people who were working on the side of the military, and along with most of the guerrillas, other than the 3 who ended up escaping, Bolivia with the help of Salvador Allende. She was murdered by the Bolivian military. But the point is that, you know, a lot of people confuse Patty Hearst, who was involved with the Symbionese Liberation Army in the 1970s. She went by the code name Tanya, but Tanya was actually the code name of Haiti Tamara Bunk during the Bolivian mission. That's where the SLA and Patty Hearst got the name Tanya. So that's one person that we want to acknowledge. The other one is obviously our auntie, Marilyn Buck, who was an organizer in Students for Democratic Society, who actually wrote the paper on patriarchy in SDS that was one of the factors that led to SDS splitting. And one of the formations that came out of that was the weather. They called themselves the Weathermen at first, and then after the work they did battling white supremacy, blowing up police stations, doing the things they did when police were guilty of police terror against African people, they had to go underground, and then they became known as the Weather Underground. And Marilyn Buck was convicted to spend 33 years in prison in 1988 for having 2 boxes of bullets, but she basically was convicted of helping Assata Shakur escape and seek asylum in Cuba. And after visiting Cuba in 1994 and developing a relationship with Assata, she mentioned to me that Marilyn Buck was in federal prison here in Northern California, in Dublin, California, which I did not know where she was. And so as soon as I got back, I wrote her and developed a pen pal relationship with her and began to actively go and visit her. And in fact, Shakur and I both went to visit her on multiple occasions. And I developed a very close relationship with her. And one of the things that I learned is that Marilyn Buck, in all those years she was in prison from 1988 until she was released because of cancer a couple of weeks before she made her physical transition in August of 2010. I know that she had at least a dozen hearings, 9 full parole hearings, where essentially she was told that if she just gave up the names of the people who helped Assata escape, her prison sentence would be reduced and would really be eliminated. She would be set free. And that entire time, she refused to do that. She refused to name anybody and tell them anything. And she did her 33 years in prison with dignity and honor to the very end of her life. And so most of you might be surprised by this, but you know, Fidel Castro was clearly a European man. He was clearly a white man, as was Che Guevara. But Fidel Castro, the leader of the Cuban Revolution from its inception until his death 4 years ago, was without question an uncompromising example of white accomplice to the African liberation movement. It was contrary to the lies coming from the white right and many in the white left about the relationship between Fidel Castro and Che Guevara, trying to throw oil on a fire and make it look as if they, you know, had fallen out with each other and Fidel had set up Che for murder, which is absolutely absurd. What Fidel did was help Che establish relationships in Africa when Che was there to help the Congolese national movement after the Central Intelligence Agency facilitated the assassination of Patrice Lumumba in the Congo. And those relationships were made, and high-level Cuban military officials, led primarily by an African named Victor Drake, went to Africa and established ties with the African Party for the Independence of Guinea-Bissau, the PAIGC, which is one of the organizations I showed you their logo earlier that we have a sister relationship with today. The Popular Movement for the Liberation of Angola, the National Union for Independence in Mozambique, the Southwest African People's Organization in Namibia. And from those relationships, Cuba began to train PAIGC, MPA, Frelimo, liberation fighters who were based in Guinea, protected by the Democratic Party of Guinea in Sékou Touré. Democratic Party of Guinea, another one of the organizations I showed you earlier that we have a sister relationship with today. And so from 1975 through the early 90s, Cuba sent 500,000 Cuban troops to Southern Africa to fight. And at that time, Southern Africa, or Azania, or what you call South Africa, that apartheid regime was backed entirely by all of Western Europe, certainly by the United Snakes of America, and by the Zionist state of Israel. The forces that were fighting against them in Southern Africa, the MPLA, Frelimo, SWAPO, the Southwest African People's Organization, Namibia, they had no support coming, no concrete support coming from anyone other than Cuba. And so Cuba sent 500,000 troops there, and they fought courageously during those years that I mentioned. And it was their existence there that stopped the racist apartheid regime from gaining control of all of Southern Africa. And quiet as it's kept, in 1990, the negotiations that were held between the apartheid regime, the United Snakes, and the liberation movements in Azania, the African National Congress primarily, led to the release of Nelson Mandela. But a condition for Mandela being released, as well as a condition for Namibia becoming independent in 1990, was the exiting of the Cuban troops from Southern Africa. So we owe a tremendous debt to Cuba. Without Cuba, Southern Africa would be under racist apartheid rule right now. There's no question about that. So we don't care what anybody says about Fidel Castro or Che Guevara. We love Fidel and Che. They're the reason why millions of our people have the ability to dream about freedom in Southern Africa today. And they made that sacrifice as a small, poor island in the Caribbean with very limited resources, and they got nothing for that. It's not like something happened because of their sacrifices that contributed to Cuba's society. No, nothing happened from that. They lost thousands of people, and it's not like they had a lot of resources to begin with, but that's what they did. And that's why we are forever thankful to them. So the question that needs to be asked here is, what do all three of these people, and you can throw A in there as well, so what do they have in common? And what they all have in common, you all, is all of them engaged in severe sacrifice to assist the African liberation movements and the liberations of colonized people around the world. And they asked for nothing in return, and they received nothing in return, because our movements are weak and disorganized, and we had nothing to give them, even if they had asked for something. But that was not why they did the work they did. They did it because they understood that by making the sacrifices they made, they were making the highest contribution to human life. Now, we're not saying you have to die or go to prison to support our struggle. But what we're saying is that you have to understand that any real accomplice work has to be based in the principle that you are engaging in that work because you have an instinctive love of justice. It has absolutely nothing to do with anything else, nothing to do with you're doing it because you want to feel good about yourself, or you're doing it because you want credit, or you're doing it because you just want to figure out a way to be able to say you did something. It's about making sure that you are doing work with no objective other than achieving justice. That's what all of those people that we just talked about had in common. So moving forward, let's talk about what are ingredients for great accomplices to our struggle. So on the top, we have pictures of Marilyn Buck when she was arrested. You can be that, or you can be what's on the bottom. So the picture on the right speaks for itself. We see this a lot from so-called socialist, white socialist left parties, not black power, not white power, but workers' power. And, if any of you are in those organizations, you should go back and tell them, whenever African people see that kind of messaging, we know immediately that that organization is not for us. Because essentially what that message is telling us is that the trauma and terror we experience every day from white supremacy is never going to be a priority to be addressed by that type of organization. And that anytime we bring it up, we're going to be accused of creating division among the races and all this other kind of nonsense. So if your interest is imposing as a friend to the African liberation struggle, that's not the messaging that is going to accomplish that. And then the picture of the man on the left on the bottom, his name was Tom Watson. And if you study history, you study agrarian history in the United States, he was a populist leader around the end of the 18th century, or the 19th century rather. He was a populist leader. And he went around, he started what was called the Populist Party. And he called for people of all races in the South. He was from Georgia, Africans, Europeans, join this party. The problem, like the poster said, is not race, it's the worker against the boss. That's what we need to do. And we need to focus on that and focus on that only. And Africans joined his Populist Party en masse. And we did all the work for the Populist Party during that time. Study the history, you can see that. We did all the work for that party. And then after the Hills, the Hayes-Tilden Compromise, where whatever was supposed to be gained from the Civil War was lost, and the South was returned to white supremacist control for the implementation of segregation for the next 100 years, Tom Watson joined the Ku Klux Klan at that point and lived out the rest of his life terrorizing African people. So our point is that you can be like Marilyn or you can be like Tom. And so if we talk about that, how do you be like Marilyn? What does that look like? And so we would say that the most important ingredient is that a real white accomplice to our struggle has to have a clear analysis about capitalism and imperialism. Capitalism as an economic system was built on the exploitation of Africa, and it's maintained today on the exploitation of African resources. We could not be communicating as we are right now through these devices without the rare earth mineral columbite, tantalite, or cobalt or coltan, which is handpicked by our youth as we speak. They work 12 hours a day, 7 days a week. They develop lung diseases, respiratory problems. The life expectancy for our mining community in the Congo is 35 years old. And this is all done to enrich the coffers of Apple and Samsung, and Motorola, and all these multinational corporations who develop the cobalt into a powder that can hold an electrical charge, which allows it to facilitate digital technology. So any device that gives or receives a signal cannot work without it. And so this is one of the ways that Africa is exploited today based on the colonial system that was set up 500 plus years ago. And I can tell you the same story about the cocoa industry, the diamond industry, the gold industry, the uranium industry, the bauxite industry. Bauxite is used to make aluminum products. All of those industries are based on exploiting Africa. So capitalism is the enemy of African people. It's the enemy of all of humanity. And anybody who's claiming to be a friend of us, but is trying to rectify how to coexist with capitalism is no friend of ours. So the main thing that any white accomplice has to do is develop a strong anti-capitalist analysis. And that means, unfortunately, y'all, that means understanding that it is not possible for you to be an ally against white supremacy and call yourself an American, because America, the concept of America is a settler colonial concept, which is based on theft of indigenous lands and the theft and kidnapping of our ancestors to build up this empire. And all the major corporations in this empire today have ties to the transatlantic slave trade, including Wall Street. Wall Street was started as an open air slave market in 1711. So you can't be a friend of ours and claim America and I'm not just talking about being a patriotic American. You can't even use that term, because the minute you call yourself an American, you're justifying what's happened here for the last 500 years. Whether you mean to or not is irrelevant. That's what you're doing. So you can't be our friend. So you have to have a strong anti-capitalist analysis. And so many young white activists have asked me over the years, well, what does that make me then? And I tell them all the time, if I were you, I would call myself a descendant of Europe fighting against settler colonialism and capitalist exploitation in the Western Hemisphere. If somebody asked me, how do you identify? That's how I would answer them. because it's not that different than how I answer right now. People ask me, are you African American? No, I'm not African American. There's no such thing. Our struggle in this country for the last 500 plus years has been to survive in spite of America. So how can we be Americans? That's like Malcolm X said, you can't have, if a cat has kittens in the oven, you can't call them biscuits. We're still Africans. So I answer that way. I'm an African in America fighting against capitalism, fighting against imperialism. That's how I answer that. So I think Europeans have to learn how to think and answer that same way. If you're going to be accomplices to us, you can't be coming to us talking about, well, we have to figure out how to get along in this system because this is all we got. And well, then once you say that, you're exposing to us that all you're really interested in doing is figuring out a way to coexist with the exploitation of this system. And we're not interested in that. The next thing that's necessary is you have to, in order to achieve the first point, you're gonna have to ensure that you're developing the structural components that can support you having that type of analysis and that kind of work happening. So first off, people gotta be in organizations. You know, going to protests is great, but if you leave the protest and you don't have any assignments, any commitments, anything, we're not really accomplishing anything except for you to be an audience member at the next protest. And that's a wonderful thing, but that is not gonna get us where we need to get to in order to alleviate the suffering. So that means you have to make a commitment to be engaged in some work on a consistent basis. And so that means organizational work. And it doesn't mean well, I don't like organizations. Look, 2 or more people fighting for a common goal is an organization. Okay, let's stop all this nonsense. I don't like Robert's Rules of Order. That's not even close to the point. The point is that you can't solve the problem by yourself. If you could, you would have done it already. So you need other people to do it. So that's organization, y'all. That's it. It's just that simple. Anybody saying anything else is just trying to create confusion so they don't have to be accountable to anything. And so once you establish that, your organization has to have a strong political education focus that is anti-colonial, anti-capitalist, anti-white supremacy, anti-patriarchal, anti-homophobic. All of those things have to be in place. That's an absolute necessity. If you are engaged in any way and you don't have all of those elements working on a consistent basis, there's no way you're going to be able to convince us that you're a qualified accomplice to our struggle. Like Shakura said, most of the people I encounter, I ask them questions, they know nothing about Africa, nothing about Africa. They know nothing about organizations today. And what they do know is usually so reactionary, it's not even worth dealing with. And so when people come to me and they say, well, I'm an accomplice, I ask them, so tell me about the Nation of Islam, for example. You know, and they'll start talking about what they don't like about the Nation of Islam. That's not what I'm asking you. I'm asking you to indicate to me what you understand about this organization, because white people might see the Nation of Islam one way. The way we see them is that for 80 years, they have been in the inner city areas in this city working with our people to the best of their ability. There is no African in America who has not been influenced by the Nation of Islam, not one. And anybody that tells you that they haven't, they're lying to you. When I was a child, they were the first organization to approach me. So I have to truthfully say, even though I don't agree with, I agree with very little that they talk about, I have to be truthful and tell you they were a major influence in my life. Whether I want to acknowledge that or not, it's true. So I don't need somebody who didn't grow up with the inner city experience I had and would be afraid to even come into the community that I grew up in telling me anything about something like the Nation of Islam. That's not how you become an accomplice. That's not your part. And just so it's clear, when we say that, we're not being hypocritical in saying that. Like, I do tons of accomplice work. I do security for trans marches. I do it for women's marches. And I've participated in those events. And I've heard people who are participating in those events at the women's events say all kind of foul things about men. I've heard trans people say all kind of foul things at their events about cis people. And I'm there to help protect them. But I understand when I walk into that space that they're speaking from the voice of their trauma. And they have every right to do that, because the trauma they experience because of patriarchy is real. And if I can't be mature enough politically to understand that, then I shouldn't be there. I'm not helping them by being there. So I'm not just telling you to do something that I don't do. We're talking to you about is what it takes to be an accomplice. I'll go today and there can be 100 people talking about how men are worthless. And I've heard that many times. And I feel most of the stuff they're saying, I agree with. They have every right to say it. And if I can't handle it, I shouldn't be there, because that's what an accomplice looks like. And then also, in order to facilitate these things happening, there has to be a strong working group. There has to be an element within your organization that's working, that has projects working around it. So for example, in the All African People's Revolutionary Party, we have an anti-patriarchy working group. And what we attempt to do in this group is first educate our membership around concepts around patriarchy, like gender being a social construct and not being a biological element, but a social construct. And that because of that, there's multiple genders. There's more than just two. So we do a lot of work in our organization. Even throughout Africa, we do this work around this, and understanding, the institutionalization of patriarchy, and that patriarchy existed in Africa long before colonialism, like it existed everywhere else. So it is so ingrained that a lot of people don't even really understand how it manifests itself. So you have to have that type of working group that's doing that work, doing the resources. So, we've been able to demonstrate to people, just to give you an example, in our party, how we have African languages that don't even have gender references in them, because historically people didn't refer to people through a gender reference. So we've been able to help educate people, and it's a struggle. People don't want to accept new ideas, you all know that, but you have to have a process, a working group that's engaged in that struggle, that takes it on, the bull by the head, and engages your people in that struggle. You have to do that. Otherwise, you can't just do it on a one-on-one individual basis. It has to be a collective organizing basis. So, we have people on our anti-patriarchy group all over the world that are working. So that's what we have to see. That's the kind of thing we have to develop. And once we do that, once we have all of this work happening, then we come to a place where people are actually reaching the level of consciousness of a person like Marilyn Buck, of a person like Haiti Bump, of Fidel Castro, of Che Guevara, true accomplices to the African liberation struggle. And that you're approaching it, as we mentioned earlier, because you want to achieve justice, not because you want to achieve some end, not because you want to coexist under capitalism and feel good about it, feel like, well, I helped, I went to the marches, so, I don't have to, we don't need a revolution here because I went to the marches, I demonstrated that I'm supportive of quote unquote Black lives, although I'm not willing to do anything to attack the system that jeopardizes Black lives. I'm for Black lives, but I'm not against the system that sabotages Black lives. We need a consciousness that defeats that kind of confusion. And these are the steps we have to go through to get it. So in other words, the old saying, if you're not a part of the solution, you're part of the problem. So if you're not a part of an organization that has a strong anti-capitalist focus, and has a primary focus on anti-colonialism, anti-capitalism, yay, objectively, you're part of the problem. You're part of the problem that we're facing. So we have to address that. We need you to address that. So the finalization, the last things we need to say is a picture of Che going by his name Tatu, which is two in Swahili, when he was in the Congo, working there, sacrificing there. See, y'all don't understand, like, how do they like Che Guevara? He was a murderer. Like, people don't study, any real history. If you want to if you believe that he was a murderer, I'm happy to show you where you were confused. What you're referencing are talking points that came from the white right in this country. And what they did is they manipulated the Habana Trials that happened in Cuba immediately after the revolution was successful. And what happened is that there were thousands of people who were war criminals under the Batista regime in Cuba. And the people in Cuba were ready to execute these people on sight. Once they gained power, that's what the people wanted to do. And Che Guevara was dispatched to oversee those trials. Now, they made errors. There were some people killed who shouldn't have been killed. Approximately 150 people actually were killed that shouldn't have been killed. And, you know, a country that kills millions is not in a position to criticize that, especially since Cuba long ago, 50 years ago, acknowledged the errors. They were a young new revolution. They were under attack. They made errors. They have a right to make errors. They're not going to be perfect. They acknowledge that. They compensated the families. This country still doesn't even acknowledge slavery or the theft of indigenous land. So nobody here is in a position to critique that about the Cuban Revolution. We're not trying to hear that. So, you know, these people, this man went to Africa and fought for Africans. So that's what we know. We don't want to hear nothing about what he wrote in his motorcycle diaries when he was 22 years old. If we had a tape recorder on you and heard what you said when you used the N-word too, just like you say he did. So we don't want to hear nothing about that. We evaluate people based on their life experience. And this man gave his life for humanity. Y'all don't understand that. I don't understand what's so hard to understand about that. You want us to look at him using the N-word when he was 22, when at 39, he died fighting for African people. And he set in motion a process that saved millions of African lives. And people can't understand why that's how we choose to look at him instead of this dysfunctional racist concept that people keep trying to impose upon us. So yeah, again, we'll say it over and over. We uphold Che Guevara and Fidel Castro. And so that's the type of work that they did that we have to ask people to do. So if your organization doesn't have these focuses that we're talking about, it's not possible for you to be an accomplice to us. It's not possible if you're not in an organization for you to be an accomplice to us. That's what we need. We need white people organized. The historical force used against us when we move is white people. That's what's happening, working class white people. That's what's happening right now in Zimbabwe on land reclamation, as Sakura mentioned. Taking back the lands that were stolen from our people and returning them to the people who they rightfully belong to. Who's in the way of that? The white settler population in Zimbabwe. The same with Azania, or what you call South Africa. Taking lands from the settlers who stole them and returning them to the people they rightfully belong to. Who's against that? The white working class people in Azania. Here in America, who is talking about returning land to the indigenous people, other than that are not indigenous people, other than us? I don't hear no white organizations talking about that. If you're not talking about that, then you're not in a position to be an accomplice to indigenous people. You're not doing that. I remember when I lived in Portland, we had the No DAPL protest, and there were all those people at the waterfront in Portland, and I was one of the speakers, and I got up there and I told them that if they weren't for the indigenous people getting their land back, that they weren't really in support of indigenous people, and you know, very few people clapped at that. I'm like, yeah, I knew you weren't gonna clap at that, because that analysis does not center you. And so, you know, we can see right through that. So if you really want to be that type of person, instead of taking other people's pot shots about Che Guevara, you need to study a lot more what that man was about, because what he was about is exactly what we need. So we have to ensure that the support for the colonized masses extends to the point where the analysis is separate from your personal interest. It can't be about that. Like, it can't be about, well, I'm going to make sure I support only what doesn't make me uncomfortable. Well, then you're not an accomplice. You know, this work is about being uncomfortable. Anybody that seriously engages in this work is always uncomfortable. I'm constantly uncomfortable every day. And that's why I'm such a strong person. So if you're not willing to be uncomfortable, just step out of the way, because you're getting in the way. You're not helping us. So you have to be willing to embrace that. Doesn't mean you can't have fun. None of y'all have more fun in life than I do. But you have to be willing to grow beyond just what you already know. That's not how you grow. That's not how you make a contribution. And so if people are willing to do all these things we're talking about, that is how you become a strong accomplice to our struggle. Those are the steps that are needed. The organizational work, the anti-colonial focus, the anti-capitalist focus, the anti-imperialist focus of a political education program, the working group that ensures all of those things are promoted and developed, and that you have work that you're carrying out that facilitates those things happening among white people. All of those things are, if you're doing those things, then you're an accomplice. And if you're doing all those things, you're not going to be one of those people who is in the way and is constantly centering themselves and is engaging in this liberal politic where, yeah, you're with us up to the point where we disagree with you, then now we're a problem. Where you talk this the same as the white right. So if you're doing all this work, you don't end up like that. So that's what we need. That's what the definition of accomplice should be. These things that we've talked about here. So with that, we'll come to our conclusion. And as always, we'll say, if you are African and you are not in an organization and you want to be in an organization, or you see the necessity to be in an organization, we encourage you to do that. Join an organization working for justice. And we invite you, if you're African, to join the All African People's Revolutionary Party. You can reach out to us if you're on the Zoom meeting. You can chat us and let us know you're interested. Or you can contact the information provided here. The first site there, aprp-intl.org, is our international site. And we will talk to you. And like I said, we have all of those things in place. A work study process. We have an anti-patriarchy working group. We have an all-African Women's Revolutionary Union. We have all of the pieces in place to do this work, and we're doing it. And so if you're interested in that, you can reach out to us. That's our international site. I have my blog. I write on it consistently. A lot of the topics or issues that we're talking about here. So if you're local or you just want to reach out to me for, that's great. You can go to abetterworld.me. And then another site that we highly recommend all the time is the hoodcommunist.org site. It's a site where Africans, revolutionaries from various organizations work and participate in writing articles. And I'm honored to participate and write for them as well, often. I write for all three of these sites that you see here. So last thing, join an organization. We believe that all of you here are here because you want to see justice served. And so we want to take that to a higher level. We want to take it to the next level. So we need your support in order to do that. So please join an organization working for justice. This is not about criticizing anybody. We do not, in the All African People's Revolutionary Party, have a philosophy. We don't have an anti-white philosophy. The Irish Republican Socialist comrades are family members to us. I trust them more than I trust some of my own biological family, because they're revolutionaries and they're proven revolutionaries. So we are interested in working with people who want to change this world for the better. So if you're African, you can join the APRP. If you're not African and you want to join an organization, we are happy to help you if you need help starting an organization, because maybe you're like, well, I want to join one, but I don't know how to do it. Well, we're happy to help you do that. We'll share our ideological training guidelines with you. We'll help you figure out how to get your organization started. We just ask that you be serious about doing it. But understand, we're talking about like people's organizations, mass organizations. Like if you're trying to register people to vote, or that's your thing, against you, good luck to you. But don't think that I'm going to help you do that work, because I'm doing revolutionary organizing work. You're not helping me do revolutionary organizing, so I got to do that. So I can't help you do your work, because then there's nobody to do the work that I feel needs to be done. And everybody has to do work that they believe in. So don't contact us about it, because that happens a lot. People always get into, well, what I want to do is start a nonprofit. Well, I'm not trying to help you start a nonprofit. That's not what of what I said made you think that I'm interested in helping somebody start a nonprofit. We're building independent revolutionary organizations. So if that's what you want to do, you don't have to do that. But I'm saying I'm willing to help you do that, because that's what I do. That's what I'm best equipped to help you with. So if you want other kind of help, then that has to come somewhere else. I don't even know who to tell you to talk to, because that's not the work that I do. But I'm sure they're out there, because that's everywhere. So whatever you do is good, though. So we just want you to do something to fight against the injustices of this system. And so on that, we'll stop. I just want to say again, because a lot of times this message, it always gets lost. And so I just want to close on this note. You cannot be an accomplice to African liberation struggles to colonize people if you are not willing to grapple with this question of American identity. American identity is white supremacy. You cannot separate the two. And so if you're not willing to grapple with that, that's always going to be an impediment to you being a strong accomplice. And I don't understand what people feel like they have to hang on to, because this is an evil empire. So I don't know why it's difficult for people to just say, you know what, I'm a human being fighting against injustice. That's my identity. I'm of German descent or Swedish descent or whatever the case may be, fighting against injustice, fighting against colonialism and slavery and white supremacy and patriarchy and homophobia. I don't know why that's a problem I don't know why people feel like they have to, if you're saying, if you want to like be a part of the theft, then I get it. Like you're just trying to be a part of the theft. But if you're saying you're fighting for justice, I don't understand why that's difficult for you to do that. And part of that comes in just how you articulate it. Like you can't be calling people African Americans. You can't be calling yourself an American. You need to be telling people, that's what I do. Like people call me African. Nobody calls me African American. I don't address it. Like I'm not an African American. I'm African in America. There's a big difference there. It might seem like semantics, but there's a huge fundamental political difference. You got to start being willing to do that. That's part of being uncomfortable. You got to start saying that, you know. Well, it's going to start any day now. Have a good 4th. I always tell people I don't celebrate the 4th of July. Our people were enslaved on the 4th of July. I don't care if it's in the supermarket checkout stand and the checker says it. They got to be educated. I tell them I don't celebrate the 4th of July. That's an imperialist holiday. That's an exploitative holiday against my people. You shouldn't celebrate it either. I tell people that all the time. And because we do that work, that's what's created the climate you're experiencing right now. Y'all don't think, you think this just came out of nowhere. That's because people have been doing this work the way we've been doing it for so long. That's why the political consciousness you see now is happening. So the only thing that needs to happen, we have to intensify that, you all. We need more people to be doing it. Not shying away from it or being scared of it, but more people doing it. So thank you all. Shakur, is there anything you want to add before we close out?
I think you said it very well. I appreciate anyone who joined today, and I encourage you to join an organization working for justice with the political education and community defense, and we look forward to seeing you very soon.
Absolutely. So everybody stay safe. I'm going to leave out of here and bike over to, I was asked by the youth here in Sacramento to come to this demonstration. I don't know if you saw it, but there was a journalist who had their eye put out by a rubber bullet by the police. So they're doing some work to support this person. So I'm going to roll over there to do that right now. But you have a great weekend. Thank you for joining us. We'll be back next week with another topic. And we want to say, spread the word, forward ever, backwards never. Join some organization working for justice. Revolution, organized revolution is the only solution. Have a good rest of your day.